Mike sighed as he closed his laptop. The end of another long workday. It was already dark outside, the soft hum of the city barely audible through the thick glass of his apartment windows. Living on the 12th floor had its perks. He enjoyed the view and the relative quiet. His fiancée, Sarah, was out of town for the weekend, leaving him alone in their spacious apartment. Mike wandered into the kitchen, grabbing a beer from the fridge. The silence of the apartment was comforting, yet somehow unsettling. He tried to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping over him. "It's just because I'm not used to being alone," he told himself. He settled on the couch, flipping through channels until he found an old thriller movie. Halfway through the film, he heard a faint noise coming from the hallway. It sounded like a soft thud, followed by a driving sound. Mike paused the movie, straining to listen, but the noise didn't repeat. He shrugged it off as his imagination, returning to the film. About an hour later, as the movie credits rolled, he heard it again, this time louder and more distinct. A thud, then a driving sound. It seemed to be coming from the hallway outside his apartment. Mike felt a chill run down his spine. He turned off the TV, standing up cautiously. He approached the door, his heart pounding. Peering through the peephole, he saw nothing unusual. The hallway was empty, lit by the dim overhead lights. He listened for a moment longer, but all was silent. Maybe it's the neighbors, he thought, trying to convince himself. Returning to the couch, he tried to relax, but the uneasy feeling lingered. He decided to text Sarah, just to distract himself. As he typed out a message, another sound caught his attention. This time, it was a soft tapping on the window. Mike's apartment was high enough that it couldn't be someone from the street, and there was no balcony outside the living room. Nervously, he approached the window, pulling back the curtain slightly. There was nothing there. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Get a grip, Mike," he muttered to himself. He closed the curtain tightly and headed to the kitchen to grab another beer. As he stood in front of the open fridge, he heard a noise from the bedroom. A distinct creaking, like the sound of someone stepping on a loose floorboard. Mike froze, the cold air from the fridge raising goosebumps on his skin. He slowly closed the fridge door, straining to hear any further sounds. The creaking continued, then stopped abruptly. Gathering his courage, Mike walked toward the bedroom, his heart racing. He pushed the door open and flicked on the light. The room was empty, everything in its place. He checked the closet and under the bed, but there was no sign of anyone. He exhaled deeply, feeling a bit foolish for letting his imagination get the better of him. Just as he was about to leave the room, he noticed something odd. The window, which he was sure he had closed earlier, was now slightly ajar. A cool breeze blew the curtain gently. Mike's pulse quickened. He closed the window firmly, locking it this time. He decided to check the apartment thoroughly, starting with the front door. The lock was still secure, and there was no sign of forced entry. He went through each room systematically, finding nothing out of the ordinary. Finally, he returned to the living room, feeling a bit more at ease. Mike settled back on the couch, trying to brush off the series of strange noises. He turned on the TV again, hoping to distract himself with another movie. As the opening credits rolled, his phone buzzed with a text message. He picked it up, expecting a reply from Sarah. Instead, the message was from an unknown number. It simply read, "Are you alone?" Mike's heart skipped a beat. He stared at the message, unsure how to respond. A second message followed quickly. "Check the hallway." Dread settled in the pit of his stomach. He stood up slowly, the phone still in his hand. He walked to the front door and looked through the peephole. At first, he saw nothing. Then, in the far corner of the hallway, he noticed a figure standing just outside the range of the dim light. The figure was motionless, barely visible in the shadows. Mike backed away from the door, his mind racing. He considered calling the police but hesitated, unsure if he was overreacting. As he deliberated, another message came through. "I'm closer than you think." Mike's breath quickened as he stared at the phone. He had to do something. He dialed 911, his hands trembling, but before he could press the call button, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the apartment into darkness. The sudden blackout made his heart pound even harder. The emergency lights in the hallway outside kicked on, casting eerie shadows through the peephole. Mike took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. He decided to check the hallway again, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious figure. He approached the door cautiously and peered out. The figure was gone. Mike exhaled in relief, but knew he couldn't let his guard down. He grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and went through the apartment again, this time more thoroughly. Every corner, every closet, every possible hiding place was checked. The windows were all locked, and there was no sign of forced entry. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted. He returned to the living room, flashlight in hand, and decided to stay there until the power came back on. He sat on the couch, eyes darting around the room, listening intently for any sound. Minutes felt like hours as he waited in the dark, his mind racing with possibilities. His phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "Nice flashlight. Won't help you." Mike's blood ran cold. He turned off the flashlight, plunging the room into darkness, and crouched low, trying to make himself as inconspicuous as possible. He had no idea how the person on the other end of the messages could see him, but he wasn't about to take any chances. He stayed still, barely breathing, listening for any hint of movement. The silence was oppressive, every creak and groan of the building amplified by his heightened senses. He knew he couldn't stay hidden forever. He needed a plan. Slowly, he crawled towards the kitchen, where he kept a set of knives. He needed something to defend himself with. As he reached the kitchen doorway, he heard a noise that made his heart stop. A soft, almost inaudible whisper of footsteps coming from the bedroom. Mike gripped the flashlight tightly and crept towards the bedroom door, his nerves on edge. He peeked inside, the beam of the flashlight cutting through the darkness. The room appeared empty, but he knew better than to trust appearances. He stepped inside, the floorboards creaking under his weight. Suddenly, the bedroom door slammed shut behind him, trapping him inside. Mike spun around, shining the flashlight on the door, but there was no one there. Panic set in, and he rushed to the door, trying to open it, but it was stuck fast. He banged on the door, shouting for help, but the walls seemed to absorb his cries. His phone buzzed again. With trembling hands, he checked the message. "Right behind you." Mike whipped around, the flashlight beam dancing wildly across the room. For a moment, he saw nothing, but then a shadow shifted near the window. He aimed the light at it, revealing a figure dressed in black, their face obscured by a hood. "Who are you?" Mike demanded, his voice shaking. The figure remained silent, slowly advancing towards him. Mike backed away, his mind racing. He needed to escape to get out of this nightmare. He lunged towards the window, hoping to break it and call for help, but the figure was faster. They grabbed his arm, their grip strong and unyielding. Mike struggled, but the figure's hold was like iron. He felt himself being pulled back towards the door. In a desperate move, he swung the flashlight, aiming for the figure's head. It connected with a dull thud, and the figure staggered, releasing him. Mike didn't wait to see the effect of his blow. He ran towards the window, smashing it with the flashlight. The sound of breaking glass filled the room, and cold night air rushed in. He shouted for help, hoping someone outside would hear him. But before he could climb out, he felt a sharp pain in his side. He looked down to see a glint of metal, a knife. The figure had recovered and was attacking him. Mike's vision blurred as he struggled, his strength fading. As he fell to the floor, the last thing he saw was the figure standing over him, the knife gleaming in the flashlight's beam. Then everything went dark. Jack sat alone in the dimly lit living room, the flickering glow of the television the only source of light. His parents were out of town for the weekend, leaving him in charge of the house. At 17, he was no stranger to being home alone, but something about this night felt different. The air was thick with a sense of unease, a feeling he couldn't quite shake off. The old house creaked and groaned as the wind howled outside. Jack tried to focus on the movie playing on the screen, but his mind kept wandering. He glanced at his phone, hoping for a distraction, and saw a message from his best friend, Mark. "How's it going? You okay?" Jack quickly typed back, "Yeah, just watching a movie. It's pretty quiet here." Mark's reply was almost instant. "If you need anything, just call me. I'll come over." Jack smiled, reassured by his friend's offer. He put his phone down and leaned back into the couch, trying to let the movie's plot pull him in. Just as he was starting to relax, a loud thud echoed through the house. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He paused the movie, straining to listen. "Probably just the wind," he muttered to himself, but his gut told him otherwise. He stood up and cautiously made his way towards the source of the noise. The hallway was dark, the only light coming from the kitchen at the far end. Jack's footsteps were silent on the wooden floor as he moved closer to the back door. It was slightly ajar, swaying gently with the breeze. Jack's breath caught in his throat. He distinctly remembered locking it earlier. He pushed the door closed and turned the lock, feeling a chill run down his spine. As he turned to head back to the living room, he heard another noise, this time coming from upstairs. "Is someone in the house?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Jack grabbed a kitchen knife, his only means of defense, and slowly ascended the staircase. The second floor was even darker, the shadows long and foreboding. He checked each room, one by one, but found nothing out of the ordinary. The last room was his parents' bedroom. The door was slightly open, and a faint light glowed from inside. Holding his breath, Jack pushed the door open with his free hand. The room was empty, but the window was wide open, curtains billowing in the wind. He hurried over to close it, his mind racing with questions. Had someone been in the house? Were they still there? A sudden creak from the hallway made him spin around. Jack tightened his grip on the knife and stepped back into the hallway. He felt a rush of cold air and realized that the front door was now open. Panic surged through him. He raced down the stairs, his eyes darting around, trying to spot any sign of an intruder. The living room was just as he had left it, but the front door was wide open, swaying slightly. Jack slammed it shut and locked it, his heart pounding in his chest. He grabbed his phone and dialed Mark's number. "Mark, someone's in the house. I heard noises, and the doors and windows keep opening." "Stay calm, I'm on my way," Mark said. "Lock yourself in a room until I get there." Jack nodded, even though Mark couldn't see him. He hurried back upstairs and locked himself in his bedroom, sitting on the floor with his back against the door. He could hear the wind outside, howling like a distant wail. Every creak and groan of the old house seemed amplified, each one making his heart race faster. Minutes felt like hours as Jack waited for Mark. He checked his phone, praying for a message or a call, anything to break the silence. Finally, the sound of a car pulling up outside reached his ears. He heard Mark calling his name from the front door. Jack unlocked his bedroom door and rushed downstairs. Mark stood in the entryway, a concerned look on his face. "Did you see anyone?" Jack asked, his voice trembling. Mark shook his head. "No, but let's check the house together." The two friends carefully searched every room, every closet, and every corner, but found no sign of an intruder. The doors and windows were all securely locked. "Maybe it was just the wind," Mark suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Jack nodded, though the feeling of unease remained. "Yeah, maybe." As they settled back in the living room, trying to shake off the lingering fear, Jack couldn't help but wonder if they were truly alone in the house. Jack and Mark sat in the living room, the tension slowly easing as they talked about everything with the strange occurrences. The conversation flowed from school to their favorite movies, anything to distract from the night's unsettling events. The hours passed, and Jack finally began to relax, the fear receding into the background. But as the clock struck midnight, a loud crash shattered the calm. Both boys jumped to their feet, hearts pounding. "That came from the basement," Mark said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jack nodded, feeling a sense of dread settle over him. They grabbed a couple of flashlights and made their way to the basement door. It creaked open, revealing a steep set of stairs descending into darkness. "You sure about this?" Jack asked, his voice shaking. Mark gave a determined nod. "We need to know what's going on." They cautiously descended the stairs, the flashlights casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The basement was cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and tools, making it difficult to see clearly. As they reached the bottom, the beam of Jack's flashlight caught something on the floor. A broken vase lay shattered into pieces. Jack's mind raced. He had never seen that vase before. Who would break a vase and just leave? Mark wondered aloud. Jack shook his head, unable to answer. As they continued to search the basement, they found nothing else out of place. No sign of an intruder, no indication of how the vase had been broken. They were about to head back upstairs when Jack noticed something on the wall near the far corner. "Mark, look at this," he called out. Mark joined him, and they both stared at the small, almost imperceptible door hidden behind a stack of old boxes. It was slightly ajar, revealing a dark space beyond. "Do you think this leads somewhere?" Jack asked. "Only one way to find out," Mark replied, pushing the door open wider. The space beyond was a narrow, dimly lit tunnel. It seemed to stretch on forever, the darkness swallowing the light from their flashlights. Jack hesitated, feeling a deep sense of foreboding, but Mark was already stepping inside. "Come on, we need to see where this goes," Mark urged. Jack followed, the narrow walls pressing in on them as they made their way through the tunnel. It felt like they walked for ages before finally emerging into a small hidden room. The air was stale, the walls covered in cobwebs. In the center of the room stood an old wooden table, and on it lay a collection of strange old photographs. Jack picked one up and shined his flashlight on it, The photograph showed a family, but something about their expressions was off. They looked almost terrified. These people, who are they? Jack wondered aloud. Mark examined another photograph. I don't know, but this is definitely creepy. As they continued to look through the photographs, a realization dawned on Jack. The house in the background of each photo was the same one they were in now. His heart raced as he flipped through more pictures, each one more disturbing than the last. The people in the photos seemed to change over time, but the expressions of fear remained constant. Jack, look at this, Mark said, holding up a particularly old photo. Jack's blood ran cold as he recognized the face in the photograph. It was the previous owner of the house, Mr. Thompson, the man who had mysteriously disappeared years ago. Do you think he was taken? Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. Before Mark could respond, a loud noise echoed through the tunnel behind them. They both turned, flashlights flickering, and saw a shadowy figure standing at the entrance to the hidden room. Who's there? Mark called out, but there was no response. The figure moved closer, and Jack's heart pounded in his chest. They were trapped. With no other way out, they braced themselves for the worst. But as the figure stepped into the light, they saw it was a man, his face pale and gaunt. He looked just like the man in the photograph. It's him, Jack whispered. It's Mr. Thompson. The man raised a trembling hand, his eyes wide with fear. You need to leave. Now. Jack and Mark exchanged a glance, understanding the urgency in the man's voice. They quickly made their way back through the tunnel, not daring to look back. As they reached the basement, they heard the hidden door slam shut behind them. They raced up the stairs and out of the house, not stopping until they were safely outside. As they caught their breath, Jack looked back at the old house, a shiver running down his spine. What just happened? Mark asked, his voice shaking. Jack shook his head, unable to find the words. I don't know, but we need to tell someone. There's something very wrong with that house. As they walked away, the sense of unease lingered. They knew their lives would never be the same, haunted by the secrets they had uncovered that night.